Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Myth Monday here on Where All the Ladies At. This is a podcast, if you've never been here, where I dive deep into history, myth, legend, and try to figure out where all the women are, because remarkably they don't get as much credit as they probably should. And there's a lot of ladies out there that fall into this bucket. This month we are celebrating Women's History Month because despite what anybody says, it's still Women's History Month. And though it is Women's History Month every month here on Where All the Ladies At, I decided to take a little... Sorry guys, I'm trying something new with my hair. Let me know what you think. Despite... I chose to do something kind of interesting, so on Myth Mondays we are looking at sun goddesses, which is not something that's typically around. And then on Thursday's edition, because there are 2 editions every week, Thursdays is more about history. We are covering women philosophers and women that stood up to fascism. Sometimes they're the same person, other times they are not. I've already covered Simone de Beauvoir and Hannah Arendt, and this week we are looking at Dorothy Thompson, who I had never even heard of. And then I was listening to some podcast, and I wish I could remember which podcast it was. It's some history. I would listen to a lot of podcasts, guys. So it was one of the history podcasts that I was listening to, and I heard about her. And then I was like, okay, let me go research her more. And she turned out to be a pretty fascinating woman. We have 2 more weeks, so we have her. And then the last week we are covering Sophie Scholl, which will be a very sad one, but very poignant one for the times we're in, I think. So, as I said, if you've never been here before, you might wonder, who the hell is this person talking to this camera in the wrong way? I'm sorry, guys. Sometimes I forget that my camera's over here, and I've got to remember that. It's still something I'm working on. I know we've been doing it for a little bit, but it's still something I'm working on. Anyway, if you're asking, who the heck is this strange lady on my TV or tablet or phone or wherever you're watching this? If you're watching it on YouTube, if you're listening to it on Spotify, you don't care what I look like, but you still might wonder who I am. So my name is Kim. I am a history nerd. I love everything about history and myth and legend. I am a writer, and I am a life coach, and I do a bunch of other stuff, but history is one of my big passions. So the fact that I could maybe make this my career, that would be awesome. I mean, not right now, but once we start building a community and we start, blowing up, because, history, it's cool, guys. It's cool. If I could make money just doing stuff on history, that would be amazing. But I have other stuff I love doing too. So anyways, that's enough about me. Let's talk about the goddess we're talking about today. But before that, let's do a little housekeeping. If you want to reach out to me, there's ways to do that in the description box. There's also ways to support the podcast financially. If you can't do that, I would just appreciate a like, a comment, a share, a follow, a subscribe. Whatever you could do to get the word out about the podcast, that would be absolutely amazing. If you want more about this topic and much more, there is a Medium publication. There's a way to get to that in the description box as well. Or you can just simply search up Where All the Ladies At. It'll pop up, I promise you. And there's also a link to my other podcast, which is called Our Mystic Road Trip. And there I talk about tarot and crystals and herbs and chromotherapy, wellness, spiritual, magical, mystical kind of things. All of that stuff is what I talk about over there. So if that's something you're into, check it out too. So with that being said, it's time to get into the topic of the day. And the topic of the day is Arinna, the Hittite Sun Goddess. Alright, so before we jump into the goddess, of course, we're going to talk about what it was like, or what archaeologists think it was like for ladies. Because obviously, none of us were around back then. The Hittite Empire was a long, long time ago, not in a galaxy far away, but pretty far away. And it was a very different time and era. So we can only really go off of what archaeologists find at digs. And we'll talk about some of those a little bit later when we get to the archaeology section. But I kind of wanted to say that before because, you know, when I'm talking about these ancient civilizations, I think it's key to understand that we're just guesstimating, right? So things can change as new sites are found and new things are discovered. So just bear that in mind. So before we get into Arinna's powers, let's look at women in the Hittite world. So here's the thing. In a lot of ancient civilizations, women were looked at very different than they were during, let's say, the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, right? Of course, not all of the civilizations felt women were... Sorry, guys, I'm really trying this new thing, and it's kind of... I'm not sure... I'm not sure it's going to happen. Anyways. But for the Hittite women, it actually wasn't... I mean, it was bad. It wasn't great, right? But it wasn't bad. Compared to other civilizations, Hittite women had some pretty sizable amounts of rights given to them. They could own land, they could run businesses, they could file for divorce, which is something that women in later societies couldn't do. So huzzah for the Hittites, right? And also Hittite women in power, such as queens, they actually had political power. They had some power. They could do religious. They could perform religious duties too. They acted as priestesses. All this stuff, right? The Sun Goddess was part of the entity of every woman and of the royal thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later because I think she played a pivotal role in all of that. Everyday women, the elites had a lot of influence, right? That's kind of just a given. Common women weren't powerless, though, in the Hittite society. They could work as merchants, farmers, scribes. Women could be literate in the Hittite society, which, once again, some women in later societies would kind of think that's kind of revolutionary. And that's kind of weird for me. Some legal records show that women were buying and selling property, they were making contracts, and they even acted as witnesses in court. Women in the Hittite society had legal standing. That was something that wouldn't be given to many other societies for thousands and thousands of years. So the Hittites were kind of, ahead of their time. So let's keep going. But there was one place in the society where maybe the women had the most power, and that was in religion. Priestesses played a huge role in temple life, and they held power. Some of them held positions where they would oversee major cult centers, worship of goddesses like Arinna, who is the goddess we're talking about this way, was definitely not a men's club. You know, women led rituals, they offered sacrifices, they ensured the gods were properly honored. And because the Sun Goddess, who we're talking about, was so tied to royal power, these priestesses were also influencing politics. And if you jump out of the real, well, I'm not going to say the real world because it depends on what you believe, but if you jump into the mythology world, goddesses like Arinna weren't just like sitting around being worshipped. They were making decisions. They were influencing the fates of kingdoms, right? Divine power was definitely not just a guy thing for the Hittites, from, the celestial throne of Arinna to the bustling markets of Hattusa, I think that's, I said that right. The Hittite women were definitely more than just standing around in history in the background, right? They were active participants. And I think that's something to really understand before we dive into the goddess, right? So, with that being said, let's dive into that goddess, right? Who was Arinna? So, in the grand lineup of Hittite mythology, Arinna was the sun goddess. She was the chief deity, the divine protector of the Hittite Empire. She was the VIP that would have the best seat in the house, right? Her origins go way back before even the Hittites rolled into Anatolia, right? So she started as a local sun goddess in the Hittite culture, I think I said pronounced right, where she was called Warunsemu, Shemu, maybe? Warunsemu, and that basically meant mother of the land. And so a goddess that has that name, like, she's pretty important, right? The goddess, okay, hold on. I lost track of my notes. Hold on. Okay, so she was definitely the entity that gave the land its fertility, and also it contributed to people's well-being. So when the Hittites rolled in, they adopted her, but they also upgraded her too. She became the sun goddess of Arinna. She ruled over sky and justice and fertility, and most importantly, the royal family, right? She wasn't a distant cosmic force. She was it personal, right? The Hittites claimed their divine right to rule through her, right? The royal ceremony, like coronation things, all were done under her blessing. So basically, if you wanted that Hittite throne, you had to have her approval, right? But she wasn't just that, right? She talked about justice too, right? Hittite kings swore oaths in her name. They wrote treaties, and she even was invoked to bring order in times of chaos. So she was also invoked when wars and things like that happen. She was a pretty badass goddess. You didn't want to be on her bad side, for sure. Let me take a drink real quick, guys. By the way, I know this isn't a mystical, magical show or anything wellness, but mineral water, it's good for you. And I highly suggest dropping a lemon in it. It's delicious. All right, anyways, not part of this show. So yeah, all of that, right? The Hittites believed she could unleash droughts and plagues and other disasters as punishment if you broke her divine laws. So Arinna was like in it for the long game, right? If you stepped out of line, she was going to make everyone feel it. So it's kind of like, I'm an English teacher too, and I always tell my students, if one goes down, you all go down with them. It's because to make it like a team effort kind of thing. This one piece of hair, man. This one piece of hair. Yeah, and so that's kind of how she felt. Like, if you messed up, it didn't matter if it was 1, 5, 10 people. Everybody was going to feel the wrath, right? But, you know, and unlike other cultures, right? Of course, we're talking about, because she's a woman, right? She was always a goddess. She didn't change. It was a big deal. The divine power wasn't just about men. It was most important god of the pantheon was actually a woman. And that extended into the normal everyday lives of the people too, right? So women were looked at to have power. So what did Arinna symbolize? We've kind of already talked about that, right? The sun, obviously. So justice, fertility, protection, royal power. You know, she was all about that. She was often depicted like standing on a lion, which, first of all, badass. Like, I mean, I like cats, okay? But I don't know if I would stand on a lion. That seems dangerous. It just seems very dangerous, right? You know, lions weren't just like kitty cats, right? They were strength and dominance and divine authority. So when you saw images of Arinna just standing on one, you knew she was in charge, right? So her influence also wasn't just symbolic, right? It had a physical presence too. Her main temple was in Arinna, and this is a Hittite religious capital. This was the Hittite religious capital. This place was the hotspot worship. So if you were a priest or a priestess, this was where you were housed out of, right? If you were a ruler, this was where you made sure the gods were on your side, right? So it was the heart of Hittite religion. And this is where everybody went to make offerings and blessings and things like that. So what kind of offerings and blessings would you give to these, right? So the thing with Arinna was, it wasn't just like every now and then. Sure, she had major festivals, right? She did. But daily rituals were important, right? They offered her bread and beer and ox. It was basically just a big barbecue all the times, right? They weren't just lighting incense and stuff. They were going into it. They wanted to make sure Arinna was going to be happy. And what's better than some bread, some beer, and a barbecue? Hello, nothing. I mean, you could add in some veggies too. I like veggies. And then there were the big major festivals, right? So these were definitely big. They were blowouts, right? The king and queen were responsible for this. They led the ceremonies. That meant things got big, right? Huge processions, music, feasting, lots of alcohol, sure, a lot of hangovers the next day. But it wasn't really about having a good time. It was, you had a good time, but the festivals were there to kind of reconnect and reinforce that connection with the goddesses or the divine in whatever aspect they were doing, right? The king and queen were part of that because they wanted to ensure that people understood that they were directly chosen by the gods, which made them almost godlike, right? And that's where it goes. Now, I said we were going to talk a little bit about archaeological sites. I want to preface this by saying, if I mispronounce these things, I'm sorry. I'm going to pronounce it like I would know. I know a little bit of Turkish, and a couple of these names look like they might be. So I'm going to pronounce it that way. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, please, by all means, comment, let me know. Be nice about it, though, okay? Because I'm trying here. These are not always easy. All right. So how do we know all this, right? Archaeologists, the superheroes of the world, that's how. Also, because the Hittites, unlike a lot of other cultures, they like to journal. They like to write everything down, right? They wrote everything on clay tablets. So archaeologists have found inscriptions dedicated to Arinna, along with temple ruins and religious artifacts that really show how big of a deal she was. It wasn't just a small local cult. It was everywhere in the Hittite Empire. One of the coolest discoveries was there's a rock relief at Alaja Hoyuk, which is an ancient Hittite city. And the carvings show like this powerful goddess standing on a lion, right? And that is like her MO, right? The relief is not just artistic, obviously. It's really proof that Arinna was kind of this central figure. And her influence is just not limited to temples, right? Hittite legal texts actually reference the sun goddess, which means she was just a spiritual. She was written into the law of the lands, right? Kings ruled in her name. Like I said, treaties called upon her. All these things have been found. Treaties called upon her, witnessed agreements, and oaths were sworn to her. Basically, if you were trying to prove anything in court, invoking her name was like a huge mic drop, right? All of this kind of tells us, all the little things together tell us that Arinna was real. She was a functioning part of Hittite life, right? From government to religion, she was present everywhere in everyday society. And thanks to the Hittites being so meticulous when it came to writing everything down, we get to know about this, right? Her role in the mythos, as I said, she was basically the divine powerhouse, right? The Hittite kings worshipped her, yes, but they tied their entire authority to her, as I've said. They proudly called themselves, and this is what they called themselves, they called them the beloved of the sun goddess. That was a statement of power, right? If the sun goddess backed you, you were legitimate, right? And Arinna also played a major role in Hittite diplomacy, as I said. People swore to her name, all this stuff. Hittite treaties often included clauses where the signers invoked her name. All of these things. The sun goddess was not just this distant figure. She was the ultimate enforcer. She ensured kings and diplomats all played fair, and in truth, if they didn't, they were going to pay the price. So, sorry guys, I keep having to talk over here. I just get distracted by my face. Alright, so we've talked all about her. We know all about her. Let's do a little bit of a mythological tale. Now, I am going to preface this by saying that though they wrote everything down, this is kind of a free-form myth. I am a writer, so I just take the things I learn and kind of try to see what we were going to do. So let's see. As always, it's story time, so grab your beverage of choice, your cocktail or your cocoa, grab a blanket, curl up. Let's do this. Imagine that you are in ancient Anatolia. That would be where Turkey is right now. Thousands of years ago. The sun is missing. People are panicking. Crops are failing. Markets are empty. And everyone is looking just a little bit too pale. Right? And the culprit? A jealous storm god. He wasn't happy. Why? Because his offerings weren't as fancy as Arinna's. Right? So in a fit of divine petulance, he decided to pull the ultimate power move. He locked Arinna's light away, plunging the world into darkness. Without the sun, everything began to wither. The people cried out in fear. The crops withered, rivers ran dry, and the very land seemed to mourn the loss of Arinna's warmth. But here's where Arinna showed just why she was the sun goddess and not just some star up there on a lazy afternoon. Arinna, not one to sit idly by, broke free from the storm god's trap. She wasn't about to let some moody weather deity keep her in the shadows. With a powerful roar, she flooded the sky with her golden light, so bright it seemed to scorch the very heavens. The storm god, caught off guard, couldn't hold on to his clouds any longer. The skies cleared, the crops flourished, and life began to bloom once again. And just to make sure he learned his lessons, Arinna made sure the storm god got the worst sunburn in history. That the storm god, usually the one who controlled the weather, was now the one hiding in the shade, his cool demeanor now singed by Arinna's blazing radiance. From that day on, the Hittites celebrated her power with massive festivals, thanking her for the light and warmth that kept their kingdom flourishing. Every year they marked the day of the sun's returning, honoring Arinna with music, dancing, and offerings of food, because let's face it, nothing says thank you like a good feast and some sacred beer. And that's a little story about Arinna. And that's Arinna, the sun goddess who kind of lit up the Hittite world. She was protector of rulers, she was protector of people, she was fertility, everything. She just kept the lights on all the time. And so that's it for Arinna. Thanks for sticking around with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it inspired you to check out more about the Hittites and also about Arinna herself. If you enjoyed the episode, let's do the typical thing. For you subscribe, leave a review, share it with your fellow friends, anybody who's into mystery, mythology, and history, all of that. That would be great. As always, guys, if you want to get a hold of me, there's ways to do that in the description box. You can just, if you're on YouTube, comment here. If you want to support the podcast, like I said, subscribe, like, review, leave a comment, all that good stuff. Share it with the people that you know that are into it. And if you can, there's ways to support the podcast financially in the description box as well. There's also a link to the medium publication that goes with this. There's a lot of cool stuff over there, and I go more in depth on a lot of the stuff that I cover, because once again, I try to keep these podcasts between 30 and 40 minutes. I know you guys have a life. Also, if you want to check out my other podcast called Our Mystic Road Trip, it's kind of like a magical, mystical, spiritual wellness kind of thing where I talk about everything from crystals to tarot to ley lines to this week I'm talking about senses like clairaudience, clairradiance, and clairvoyance, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, check that out too. And as always, guys, I just want you guys to stay curious, stay blessed, and stay safe. I'll talk to you guys next week. Oh, and don't forget Thursday's episode because Dorothy Thompson is a badass. Cool. See you next week.